So thanks for hanging on for the last panel of the day. We have 3 speakers on the topic of sustainability, some different aspects of sustainability. We'll start out with Robert McDonald, who's very kindly filling in for Margaret Hedstrom, who couldn't make it. Robert's Associate Dean for Library Technologies and Digital Libraries, as well as Associate Director of the Data to Insight Center and Pervasive Technology Institute, and Executive Director of Koale University. So take away, Robert.
Well, I didn't know I'd get a plug for some of my other software.
Susan Parham is my co-convener down here, and I forgot to mention that SIGDL, the Special Interest Group on Digital Libraries from PASIX, is the sponsor of this session. But Susan's going to be watching Twitter very carefully. So if anybody prefers to chime in that way, we'll take questions that way also.
Great, no problem, no problem. So as you can tell today, I'm filling in for Margaret Hedstrom, and I pulled some slides together this morning, and luckily for me, Margaret and Jim Myers, who's at Rensselaer Polytechnic, who's one of our other PIs on our SEED DataNet, have talked a little bit about issues around sustainability, because that's what this panel is about. Now, the key thing to know, and of course, the prerequisite team slide of SEED, you'll notice that we're a partnership from the University of Michigan as the lead, Indiana University, University of Illinois, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And the key goals around SEED, we're funded under the NSF DataNet track, is to build an international resource for sustainability science and bring in some novel technical and business approaches to supporting the long tail of research data, as well as having actionable data services, and that's the part of SEED that people always ask me the most about, because SEED stands for Sustainable Environment Actionable Data, and I'm going to get into a little bit about that. Around services for actionable data, as well as curation and preservation infrastructure. And you'll see here our logos from our 4 partner sites. But the key thing to think about with SEED, in addition to the fact that we will be spending part of our 18-month prototype looking at our overall business plan, is that we're dealing with sustainability research data, as well as being a project that wants to be sustainable for the future as well. And we're, because of the data we're looking at in sustainability, there's all the issues around aggregating to show global consequences from many different data sources. We're looking at multiple timescales of data and coupling of natural and human systems and interacting with systems requiring multidisciplinary understanding of the data. And so you get that whole, broad spectrum of things with environment, economic, social factors. And, just like many of the other panels today, a lot of the issues there are going to be the same. And I've got a really nice slide from my colleague Jim that talks about some of the biggest challenges that face what we want to do. And in fact, in the panel previous to this, I think they probably covered most of them, but I'll talk about them in the context of our DataNet Fund project. But we like I said, we see many different dimensions, many coordinate systems, many scales and formats, and that's one of the things we're really working on now is looking at some specific data from researchers at the University of Illinois and some other researchers associated with the National Center for Systems Dynamics, and taking a look at what makes up a data set for them and how we're going to provide services for those in our 18-month prototype. And so that's the key piece of SEED is enabling sustainability research. Discovering and integrating data, that's a major challenge. Understanding the quality and applicability of data is another significant challenge. And collaborating, across projects to really coordinate the data collection, that's another one that we see. But what we want to do is get further up in the data stream, closer to the actual experiment to enable that. And that's where, our active and social networking kind of components come in with what we're doing. And here's Jim's slide, and I think he hits on, everything that everyone talked about today that's a major challenge, but managed data storage and services are expensive. We definitely heard that from our last panel. Begging for metadata doesn't work. You have to really capture it when it's fresh from the experiment if you want to keep it, because it's going to be too expensive to go back and retrofit that. Curation and preservation are time consuming, like we all know. The long tail for this type of data is not really standardized. You don't always know what you need to know in order to collect what you need to collect for the future. The data models for this evolve, and as we all know, when you're building big cyber infrastructure, it's usually obsolete by the time it gets into place and it actually has all the services you want around it. And building community as we leverage the cyber infrastructure is a key piece for us with Seed. So that probably is the biggest differentiator for what we want to do for sustainability, and that's where I'm going to, kind of tie in what we want to do with sustainability is that all of the infrastructure resources that we're using are coming from existing institutional infrastructure that's already out there. We were lucky enough to be able to get the CIOs and research technology CIOs around the table when we started this project with our partners. So everything we're using is committed infrastructure. It's not coming out of our overall budget for the rest of what we're doing with our research track, with our track around putting together some of our tools that are going to enable some of what we want to do. And that's the whole piece to our virtual archive infrastructure, is to have that in place with enough infrastructure to be able to take on data, but to then really aggregate data across institutional repository types of resources. And we're starting with institutional repositories. We also think we can probably reach beyond that once we get a workable product that supports the needs of our sustainability researchers. And we're doing that in a very open way so that we can get kind of an agile development process working between the researchers and our teams that are building the active and social curation component, and our teams that are building the virtual archive component. And as you see here, we're starting out, like I said, with institutionally committed resources from IU, from UIUC, from Rensselaer, and we're working with the repositories at ICPSR, University of Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois as first initial targets to have as the long-term repository of record for that particular data type. So, our key questions, around this are what can Seed capture and when? And like I said, it's got to be closer to the experiment. And how can Seed provide direct value to data producers, users, and curators? We really want to be able to bring into that and leverage the semantic tools we're working with that build up our whole components in our active and social curation component, and be able to leverage those with new tools to see how we can at least reduce barriers and hopefully lower costs, or at least get costs to a maintainable level that can be supported by the particular community. Because one of the things I know my other two panelists will be talking about are their business plans. And when I was introduced, we mentioned Koali LA. I've worked with those guys. I've worked with Vivo. I've worked with a couple other open source software pieces looking at those kind of plans. And that's the key thing. You have to drive that by the community. Can the community support the business plan that you want to put into place? Because if they can't from the get-go, you either need to broaden that community so that they can support it, or you need to scope it to something that will actually work for the community. And we hope that by pulling in the institutional resources that we have from our research partners that are funded under their long-term business plans for their institutions, that gives us one more stream of income, in-kind income of infrastructure to help us then prop up that business plan for the long term. So key thing to know about Seed: over the next 18 months, we're building a prototype, and the two components there are the active and social content curation. We'll have a pilot active content repository that will actually work with two different systems that are leveraging semantic stores, and we're using Vivo for the social networking component as a demo, and we're using Tupelo and Medici, which are open source software pieces from NCSA that will actually work with our provenance data and some of the other data that we're pulling in from the data sets to provide different types of user interfaces for the research community that's using it. For our cyber infrastructure for long-term access, we're actually testing some things out right now with a couple of different softwares, but there are already existing softwares that we're looking to put into the stack so that, long-term, any of these open source softwares that we're using, what's going to be best and viable there for our business plan is the community support of those tools. So we want to be able to put things in in such a modular way that, you know, if it lasts, we use it. If it doesn't, if the community changes and no longer supports that piece of open source software, there's still stuff that we can go find that's out there that will take the place of that, and we'll be able to swap it in and out. And so for the other piece of that, in the 18 months, we'll have our pilot federated repository infrastructure. So just a very quick view of overall seed views that you see here. We're going after the community agile development. We've already embedded some researchers to study the use cases of our sustainability researchers, and they've been spending time doing mock-ups of what the interface should look like. You know, for most of those researchers, while we know we're probably going to have 3 or 4 different types of interfaces to it, because we know that the one portal to serve them all, you know, just generally doesn't work too well. It needs to be more flexible, dynamic, and agile than that. The active curation piece will leverage existing tools of semantic web, and really, I think, offer some interesting things that what now, you know, I think is being termed alt metrics, a way to look at how researchers use the data in that way. It'll be able to do that for us with some really cool effects, and also be able to give a use and reuse kind of scientific mapping of the researchers over the tops of the data that we're going to curate and store in those institutional repository infrastructures. And then we'll leverage existing institutional resources to do that, like I said, and that's what we want to do, is build this community that's large enough of the willing, the coalition of the willing, to put some of their cyber infrastructure into the mix to help build this for sustainability science, and grow the partnership with sustainability researchers and get the collaboration and build a larger community that's going to sustain the data for the long term. So those are the quick kind of overview to our cyber infrastructure. And I think that's, you know, like I said, the thing that really differentiates us, we're using existing software to put in place to build the 2 components that we see that are needed there to meet the needs of those researchers. And then we're using existing cyber infrastructure as a monetary stream in our business plan to keep that going for the long term. So I know my talk's a lot more brief than our other 2 panelists, but I think I gave you an idea of where we're at. We'll also be working on a business plan probably starting in the next 3 months that'll run for about a 6-month time period that we'll be coming out with to look at those monetary streams for long-term sustainability for seed. Thank you very much.